The storm was already muting the world when Silas Boone spotted her silhouette just beyond the ridge, a slumped figure stumbling down through snow like a shadow unspooled from the clouds above. Wind howled low, steady, chewing at the edges of the cedar grove behind the cabin. He leaned on the rail of the porch, a knife half sharpened in his palm, and narrowed his eyes beneath the brim of a battered hat dusted white with flurries. She was wrapped in a threadbare shawl, more holes than cloth, and boots that looked like they'd been stitched with desperation instead of thread. One hand clutched a satchel tight to her chest, the other was outstretched, not waving, not asking, just there like a tree limb refusing to fall. She didn't cry out, didn't beg, just kept walking, even as her knees buckled once in the snow. Silas didn't speak. He stepped inside the cabin, lifted the rifle from above the fireplace, and returned to the porch. She saw the weapon. Her steps stopped short, too suddenly, and she dropped to her knees, breath shallow in the frigid air. "Please don't shoot," she said, her voice cracking like the ice on the creek. "I'll give you strong children if you spare me." Silas froze, not because of her words, strange and ragged as they were, but because of the way she said them. Not flirtation, not manipulation, just bare, frostbitten truth. A woman who had run out of things to trade except herself. He lowered the rifle. No spoken word. He just turned, walked back inside, and left the door wide open behind him. She followed, slow as a ghost, leaving prints that filled quickly with snow. Inside, the fire still held its orange breath in the stone hearth. The old rocking chair, his wife's, stood silent in the corner. A kettle simmered low on the stove, scentless. Silas tossed a log onto the flames, sat in the same place he always sat, and resumed sharpening his knife. She stood near the door for a long time, the bundle still clutched. Her hair, soaked and stiff with ice, clung to her cheekbones like strips of black ribbon. Blisters decorated her fingers, some peeled open, raw from cold or labor or both. "You hungry?" he muttered finally, eyes on the blade. She nodded once. He slid a dented tin bowl toward the stove and ladled thick beans into it. No meat in the stew, hadn't been for weeks, but it was hot and salted. She didn't sit, just crouched by the fire and ate with both hands, her fingers trembling, her mouth trembling more. Still, she didn't cry. That part of her was long dead. Silas watched the snow collect on the windowsill. A draft whined through the wallboards, rattling a nail that once held a hat. The knife in his hands never made it back to its sheath that night, just stayed beside him on the table, a quiet companion. She finished eating, wiped her mouth with the edge of her own shawl, and unrolled a thin wool blanket from her bundle. A letter fell out, unopened. She tucked it quickly back in without reading it. Then she lay down in front of the fire, like an animal who didn't expect to wake. Silas let the fire burn low before he moved again. He stirred the embers with a stick, stirred the memories with it too. The rocking chair creaked once, though no one sat in it. The wind shifted. The rifle stayed loaded on the wall. That night, two people shared a room without sharing a word. The fire burned between them like a line drawn in ash. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. The only sound was the wind outside and the soft, near-silent way the snow kept falling, like it had forgotten how to stop. It wasn't until the third morning that she said her name. He was splitting it out back when she stepped into the snowlight, barefoot despite the frost, her breath curling like smoke. She stood quiet a long while before she spoke. "Mercy," she said, her voice small but steady. "Mercy, Cale." Silas didn't look up, just brought the axe down clean through the log. He stacked the halves, paused. "Silas," he replied after a beat, though she hadn't asked. Then he split another. She lingered a moment longer, then drifted back inside. That night, by the fire, she told him the rest. She'd been a wife twice, once to a man too old, once to a man too mean. Neither had left her with much. The second gave her a son. Pneumonia took him before his 4th birthday. Then there was the uncle, if you could call a man that, who took her in after the second burial. He let her stay in a barn, fed her beans when he was sober, fists when he wasn't. She'd run when the snow first fell. The cold didn't scare her. Nothing did anymore. "I ain't looking for a man," she added. "Just somewhere I don't have to die." Silas listened, motionless in his chair. The fire cast shadows on his face like scars. He didn't speak of his own past. Just stood up, walked to the back room, and returned with a folded wool shawl, deep red, hand-stitched, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. He sat on the bench beside her. She'd want it used, was all he said. Mercy didn't touch it. The days that followed were wordless but watchful. Silas kept to his routine, mending fences, feeding the horse, checking the trap line. He hardly ever looked at her directly, but always seemed to know where she was. Mercy moved softly, like someone afraid to leave footprints. She swept the hearth. She stitched the curtain where it had torn. She cleaned a rusted pot until it shone again. She cooked without salt, but not without care. One morning, she found a braid hanging from a nail in the wall near the kitchen. Dark hair tied with blue ribbon, stiff with age. She didn't touch it, just stared at it like it was someone breathing. There was a coffee cup on the mantel, untouched, dust-lined. She wiped around it, but never lifted it. A pair of leather boots stood near the door, toes worn thin. She once placed her bare foot beside them, not to try them on, but as if measuring a ghost. At night, she slept curled tight beside the fire, the same way children do when they expect to be moved before morning. He didn't. One night, a wild dog howled from the canyon. Mercy startled in her sleep, eyes flying open. Silas, already half awake, reached silently for the rifle leaning near the door. He didn't ask why she'd flinched, but from that night on, he kept the rifle beside his bed. In the small acts, they learned each other's shadows. She noticed how he stirred his coffee, but never drank it. He noticed how she hummed, low and tuneless, when her hands were busy, like it helped keep the memories quiet. Once, she found a comb snapped in half inside a drawer. She ran her fingers along the jagged edge, then placed it back exactly as she'd found it. Another time, he caught her standing in the doorway, looking out at nothing. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. "No," she said, almost a whisper. "Just checking no one's coming." He didn't press her. Silas kept the fire going longer than usual those nights. She noticed that too. By the end of the week, she finally took the shawl, wore it like armor. The red stood out against the ash-colored walls, the faded rugs, the worn life of the place. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything they hadn't said. Not all scars bleed. Some just settle into the floorboards. Others sit quietly in the corner of a room, tucked inside an old coffee cup, a pair of boots, a ribbon braid left hanging on a nail. Neither of them asked anything more, and yet both were answering questions no one had spoken aloud. The snow came harder that evening, thick flakes swirling like ash from a broken sky. Mercy had just placed another log on the fire when hoofbeats cracked through the silence, slow, uneven, and too close for comfort. Silas was already standing. Out the window, a figure moved through the white, a Lakota rider wrapped in furs, leading a limping pony. He dismounted near the fence, didn't approach right away. The horse trembled, one leg bloodied from a cut that hadn't been dressed. Mercy moved first. She opened the door and stepped into the cold. "Silas," she said over her shoulder, calm but urgent. "He's freezing. The horse is wounded. Please." Silas didn't move at first. His hand rested near the rifle. Not on it, just close. Then he gave a small nod. The Lakota man bowed his head once in thanks and entered with slow, respectful steps. His name was Witcha, and he spoke English gently but clearly. Mercy helped him strip the saddle and set it by the hearth while Silas brought blankets for the horse out to the barn. Witcha sat cross-legged on the rug near the fire, steam rising off his shoulders. Snow clung to his braids. He accepted a bowl of stew with grace and ate quietly. Mercy poured strong coffee. The three of them sat in stillness, the fire casting long shadows that wavered like old secrets. It was Witcha who broke the silence first. "You live alone?" he asked Silas. Silas gave a slight shrug. "Used to." Witcha turned to Mercy. "You were with Roth, the trader near Painted Bluff." Mercy's hand tightened on her coffee cup. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Not anymore," she said. He looked down. "I remember. He beat you when he was drunk. Sold you for bullets. I saw you run. No shoes. No coat. Mercy's lips thinned. That girl died in the snow. Silas didn't speak, but the air in the cabin thickened. Later, after Witcha had fed the horse and taken the extra blanket to the loft, Silas stood by the fire, watching the flames stretch and shrink. She lied, Witcha said quietly, stepping to his side. But not to hurt you. He didn't say anything else, just nodded once and disappeared into sleep. When the fire had burned low and the cabin breathed soft again, Silas stepped outside into the cold. The barn was silent, save for the horse's slow shuffling. Lantern in hand, he walked to the far stall and found the rope Mercy had coiled neatly after using it earlier in the week to bind firewood. Or so she'd said. It was thick, knotted at both ends, frayed where it had been cut in haste. The kind of rope used for livestock. And wrists. He stood there a long time, the cold crawling up his spine like a memory. Then he took the rope, carried it back to the cabin, and fed it to the fire. The flames leapt up at once, hungry, eager. The rope crackled, blackened, turned to smoke. By morning, the ash was gone. Mercy never asked about it, but her eyes flickered toward the hearth once, when she thought he wasn't looking. The storm raged another day. Witcha offered Mercy a small gift before leaving. A wooden horse, hand-carved and smooth at the edges, worn from travel. She traced its tiny mane with the pad of her thumb, unsure whether to weep or smile. She chose neither. As Witcha mounted his now-mended horse and disappeared into the snow, Mercy stepped out onto the porch, shawl wrapped tight around her. She didn't wave. Silas stood behind her in silence. Inside, the fire crackled again, as if to remind them both that not all warmth comes from flame. Some of it has to be earned. Some has to be protected, even from the people it's meant for. That night, she slept with the carved horse tucked inside her bundle. And Silas didn't pick up the rifle again, not even when the wind moaned like a wounded thing through the trees. She tried to leave just before dawn. The frost was still crusted on the windows, the fire barely embers when she crept across the creaking floorboards, bundle slung over one shoulder, boots tied with torn cloth. Her hand hovered near the door latch. Don't. Silas's voice was low, not angry. Just there. She turned slowly. He stood in the hallway, hair tousled from sleep, no rifle in sight. Just his eyes, clear, unreadable, fixed on her like the land outside. Mercy didn't speak. She looked down at the floor, then back at the door. But she didn't move. Instead, she slipped the bundle off her shoulder and left it beside the fire. She sat down on a bench again and stoked the coals, same as always. From that morning on, something changed. Not in words, they still spoke little, but in the rhythm of things. Mercy cooked quietly, scraping potatoes and boiling beans with a strange, solemn grace. Silas brought back bundles of firewood and left them stacked beneath the lean-to. He patched the roof. She scrubbed the table until the wood showed through. One evening, a surprise, he mended an old cotton dress, blue, faded, stitched with white thread at the cuffs. He laid it gently across her bed. Didn't say a word about it. She didn't wear it, but she smoothed the fabric once with her hand, like she was checking for breath in a sleeping body. Days grew longer, wind sharper. Still they stayed in that house together, two ghosts pacing separate haunts. He noticed how often she stared at the hills now, especially in the morning, especially after snowfall. You looking for someone? He asked once, repeating the question he'd asked weeks before. No, she said, just making sure no one's looking for me. He nodded, and that was that. But that night, after stew and the silence that always followed it, she turned to him by the firelight and asked, "Why here? Why so far from anyone?" Silas was sharpening his knife again. Not out of need, just habit. He paused, held the blade still. There was a sickness, he said finally, swept through the valley. Took her in a week. I rode to town for help. They came too late. His eyes didn't rise. I buried her myself, in the red shawl she used to wear when the cold came early. Mercy's breath caught, but she said nothing. The fire popped, sending sparks like whispers into the air. He stood, walked out onto the porch, and didn't return for a long while. When he did, she was gone from the fire. But the red shawl, the one he'd given her weeks ago, lay folded on the table between them. Neither of them touched it. They both cried that night. Separately, quietly, like confession through breath. In the days that followed, small things softened. Mercy oiled the hinges on the door, and it stopped creaking. Silas began carving again. Not horses, but spoons, simple and smooth. One morning, she set 2 cups of coffee on the table. He drank his. They still didn't speak of anything beyond the firelight. But they didn't need to. Some wars were fought with silence. But some peace, the kind that lasted, began with nothing more than a name, spoken kindly. And sometimes that was enough. The snow broke like a fever. Spring didn't rush in, it crept. Slow and muddy, thick with melt and the first green tips of grass where winter had starved the land. Mercy knelt behind the barn with a sack of onion bulbs and dirty hands. Her fingers moved with careful rhythm, the way she once handled cloth or bruises. Now, she planted things. Silas stood nearby, watching her, the rifle in his hands. He didn't aim it, just held it like a walking stick, worn and steady. "You ever shot one before?" he asked. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the morning sun. "No." But when he handed it to her, and she took aim at a rusted tin he'd propped on the fence post, she didn't hesitate. The first shot cracked true. So did the second. He whistled low. She didn't smile, but her mouth curved a little at the edges, and that was enough. They practiced like that 3 mornings in a row. By the 4th, she hit a nail clean through. That afternoon, the bounty hunters came. 2 of them. One clean-shaven, the other with a scar across his cheek that looked like lightning trapped in skin. They came riding hard down the slope, dust cloud trailing behind like a warning. Silas met them before they reached the house. "We're looking for a woman," the clean one said, voice slick as oil. "Run off from a trader in Deadroot. Small, dark hair. Might be calling herself Mercy now." Silas didn't flinch. "Ain't no woman here but my wife." He said it so plain, so quiet, it didn't sound like a lie. Not even to Mercy, who stood behind the curtain inside, her whole body trembling. Scarface narrowed his eyes. "She's worth a bounty." "So's your horse," Silas replied. "Doesn't mean I'm selling it." They left soon after, not empty-handed. Silas tossed them 2 old canteens and told them the road north was washed out, just in case they tried circling back. That night, the fire burned low, and Mercy sat beside him on the bench, both of them still in their day clothes. She didn't speak, just reached out and laid her hand atop his, rough on rough, scar on scar. Her fingers didn't tremble anymore. He didn't move, didn't pull away. They just sat like that, as if time had stopped to let them remember what stillness felt like. No promises, no grand confessions, just warmth shared by the same fire. The next morning, she wore the dress, the one he'd mended and folded with care. The blue cotton, softened with age, stitched with a patient hand. She stepped out barefoot into the garden patch, carrying a chipped bowl of seeds, humming something faint and wordless. Silas watched from the porch, coffee in hand. She didn't glance his way, but she knew he was there. And for once, she didn't feel watched. She felt seen. He set the coffee down beside a vase of prairie flowers she'd picked the day before, tucked into a jar where his wife's cup used to be. The rifle leaned nearby, unloaded. The rocking chair creaked gently in the morning breeze. Not abandoned now, just in use. That night, they shared bread she'd baked, burnt at the edges, soft in the middle, and laughed quietly when it stuck to their teeth. The fire crackled. Different now, not just for heat, but for home. It was Witcha who brought the warning. He rode in with dust on his shoulders and urgency in his jaw. Silas met him halfway to the porch. "They're coming," Witcha said, breath short. The man she ran from, and others with him. He paid well to find her. Inside, Mercy had already stopped stirring the stew. She leaned against the doorway, the firelight carving a soft halo around her cheek. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. Silas didn't ask what she wanted to do, but she told him anyway. "I didn't run this far to watch someone else fight for me." So they readied the land. Silas showed her the ridge trail where he'd laid snares for foxes. He buried iron spikes beneath soft dirt near the stable. He poured lamp oil across the barn threshold. Mercy sharpened the kitchen knives and cleaned the rifle herself. That night, They didn't sleep apart. She lay beside him by the hearth, not curled like a child anymore, but steady like stone that had stopped rolling. Her hand found his shoulder in the dark. Neither of them spoke. At dawn, the men came. 5 of them. One with a red hat, one missing half an ear, and the traitor, old, cruel-eyed, grinning before he saw who held the rifle. The battle didn't last long. Violence rarely does when it's honest. Mercy fired the first shot. It struck the red-hatted man in the thigh. He screamed and dropped where he stood. Silas took a shot to the arm, but stayed on his feet. The traitor tried to run. Witcher brought him down with a thrown rope, the same kind Mercy once burned. They tied him to the tree at the edge of the property, the one she'd nearly died beneath all those months ago. He wept there, not for her, for himself. Silas didn't speak to him. Mercy did. She said, simply, "You do not own what you cannot carry." They buried the 2 who died, one beneath the cottonwood, one near the back fence. Not with cruelty, but with silence. Mercy wrapped Silas's wound that night. She tore strips from a worn quilt and boiled water twice. Washed him slowly, not like a nurse, like someone who'd once needed that same care and never received it. He didn't thank her. She didn't ask him to. That night, the fire burned low, but it was enough. She curled into his chest without hesitation. He placed his uninjured hand on hers, closed his eyes, slept. Outside, the wind carried no threats, only spring air and owl calls. Weeks passed. The garden grew. The house held the smell of coffee and onion skin, which it came by sometimes to leave fish or stories. Mercy would braid her hair before sitting on the porch, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. One afternoon, Silas walked into the cabin and found her sewing something small in the corner chair. The rocking one. She didn't hide it. A red shawl lay across her lap. On its inside corner, she'd stitched 2 names in thread. Mercy. Silas. He didn't say a word. But that night, when he rocked back in the chair and it creaked under his weight, Mercy laughed. Not loud, just enough for the fire to notice. And the rocking chair, once frozen by memory, moved easily. Not from ghosts now, but from joy, from life rebuilt, from love, chosen not begged.